She walked onto the jet wearing a hoodie and worn-out sneakers, looking like she didn't have a dime to her name. Captain Brandon Pierce took one look at her and decided she didn't belong in his sky. He sneered, pointed to the door, and ordered her to give up her seat for a real VIP. He thought he was protecting the prestige of the company. He thought he was untouchable, but he made one fatal calculation. He didn't check the tail number registration because if he had, he would have realized that the woman he was humiliating wasn't just a passenger. She was the one signing his paycheck. Buckle up. This flight is about to hit some serious turbulence. The tarmac at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was slick with fresh rain, reflecting the runway lights like a shattered mirror. Teterboro was the playground of the elite, the gateway where Wall Street wolves and Hollywood royalty bypassed the indignity of TSA lines. Parked at the far end of the private terminal stood the crown jewel of the airfield, a brand-new Gulfstream G700, painted in a matte midnight blue that looked black under the night sky. Its tail number, N909SA, was whispered about in aviation circles. It was one of the fastest, most luxurious ultra-long-range jets in the world, capable of flying from New York to Tokyo without breaking a sweat. Inside the cockpit, Captain Brandon Pierce ran his pre-flight checks with the precision of a surgeon. Brandon was a man of the old guard, 55, silver-haired, with a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and an ego to match. He had flown for the AirForce, then commercial, and finally, he had ascended to the pinnacle of aviation, private charter for the 0.01%. Fuel load is confirmed, Captain, said his co-pilot, Evan, a younger man who still had the nervous energy of someone trying to impress a legend. Brandon grunted, flipping a switch on the overhead panel. Good. We need to be wheels up in 40. The client is Tiffany St. Clair. Her father owns St. Clair Media. She's notoriously difficult, Evan. If the coffee isn't 190 degrees, she'll have your badge. Everything has to be perfect. Understood, sir. Brandon looked out the cockpit window, scanning the rainy tarmac. A black SUV had just pulled up to the stairs. But instead of the limousine carrying the Sinclair heiress, a battered rideshare sedan idled near the wing. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was a black woman, likely in her late 20s, though her tired eyes made her look older. She wore an oversized gray hoodie that had seen better days, black leggings, and sneakers that were scuffed at the toes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she carried a canvas tote bag rather than a Louis Vuitton carry-on. Brandon frowned, his brow furrowing. Who is that? Evan craned his neck. Maybe catering or a cleaning crew member sent last minute. She's walking up the stairs, Brandon snapped. Without a uniform, and she looks like she just rolled out of bed. Brandon unbuckled his harness, his face flushing with irritation. This was a $30 million machine, not a public bus. He took pride in the exclusivity of his vessel. He didn't tolerate disorder. Stay here, Brandon commanded. I'll handle this. We're not running a charity shelter. Brandon exited the cockpit, adjusting his tie and smoothing his blazer. He marched through the galley, past the flight attendant, Sarah, who was busy arranging a tray of crystal flutes. Sarah, did you authorize a visitor? Brandon barked. Sarah looked up, startled. No, Captain. I thought the passenger list was just Miss Sinclair and her assistant. Exactly. Brandon pushed past her into the main cabin. The interior of the Gulfstream G700 was breathtaking. Cream leather seats, walnut wood veneer, and gold-plated fixtures. It smelled of expensive leather and fresh orchids. And there, sitting in the principal seat, the forward-facing club seat, usually reserved for the person paying the bill, was the woman in the hoodie. She had settled in, placing her canvas tote on the pristine carpet. She was looking out the window, watching the rain streak against the glass, looking utterly at peace. Brandon felt a vein in his temple throb. The disrespect was palpable. He cleared his throat, a sound like a gavel striking wood. Excuse me, Brandon said, his voice dripping with condescension. The woman turned. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and surprisingly calm. Hello. You are in the wrong place, Brandon stated, not bothering to introduce himself. He stood over her, using his height to intimidate. The cleaning crew enters through the rear service door. and you are certainly not scheduled to be sitting on the Chomet upholstery. Get up. The woman blinked, a faint smile playing on her lips. I'm not the cleaning crew, Captain. My name is Nia. I'm on the manifest. Brandon let out a short, incredulous laugh. The manifest, sweetheart. The manifest for this flight lists Tiffany St. Clair, the daughter of a media tycoon. It does not list. He waved a hand vaguely at her outfit, whatever this is. I was added an hour ago, Nia said softly. Check your iPad. I don't need to check anything to know you don't belong in a G700, Brandon sneered. This is a private charter, not a Spirit Airlines connection. You are trespassing on private property. Nia shifted in the seat, her hands resting on the armrests. I assure you, I'm not trespassing. I need to get to London tonight. It's urgent, and I need to maintain the standards of this aircraft, Brandon shot back. Now, grab your bag and get off my plane before I call security and have you dragged off. Nia's expression hardened. The softness in her eyes evaporated, replaced by a steeliness that Brandon, in his arrogance, failed to recognize as authority. I suggest you check the manifest again, Captain Pierce, she said, reading his name tag. Before you make a mistake you can undo. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. Sarah, the flight attendant, hovered nervously by the galley, clutching a bottle of champagne. She looked between the captain and the woman, sensing that something was wrong, but too afraid of Brandon's temper to intervene. Brandon was about to retort when the sound of high heels clacking against the metal air stairs echoed through the open door. Finally, a shrill voice cried out, God, the weather is hideous. Why haven't we taken off yet? Tiffany St. Clair swept into the cabin like a hurricane of perfume and entitlement. She was dressed in a pink designer trench coat, massive sunglasses despite it being night, and was followed by a weary-looking assistant carrying 3 massive suitcases. Tiffany stopped dead in her tracks when she saw Nia sitting in the prime window seat. Tiffany slowly lowered her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing. Captain, why is there a person in my seat? Brandon's posture shifted immediately. He went from aggressive bully to obsequious servant. He flashed Tiffany a charming, practiced smile. Mississippi St. Clair, welcome aboard. My humblest apologies. We were just dealing with a minor security breach. Brandon glared at Nia. This individual was just leaving. Tiffany wrinkled her nose, looking at Nia's worn sneakers. EW, did she touch anything? I don't want to sit there if it's contaminated. Nia remained seated, her composure unnatural. I'm not a security breach, Nia said, her voice raising just enough to cut through Tiffany's drama. I'm a passenger. I'm flying to London, same as you. Tiffany let out a loud, mocking laugh. You? Flying private? Did you win a lottery ticket or something? Or are you the nanny? She looked around. Where are the kids? I hate kids. No kids, Nia said. Just me. Brandon stepped forward, his patience gone. He couldn't let Tiffany Sinclair, one of their most high-value clients, be inconvenienced by this stowaway. Listen to me, Brandon hissed at Nia, leaning down close to her face. I don't know who let you on or what glitch is in the system, but Ms. Sinclair charters this jet exclusively. You are ruining the aesthetic and the experience. Now move. Nia looked at him. Move where? Ideally, the tarmac, Brandon said. But if you insist on this delusion that you're flying with us, get out of the VIP seat. You can sit in the jump seat in the galley behind the curtain where no one has to look at you. The jump seat was a small, uncomfortable fold-down chair used by crew members during takeoff and landing. It was cramped, stiff, and degrading for a passenger. Nia looked at the plush leather seat she was currently in, then at the hard jump seat in the distance. She looked at Tiffany, who was tapping her foot impatiently, and at Brandon, who looked ready to physically haul her out. You want me to sit in the servants' quarters? Nia stated flatly. It fits the wardrobe, Tiffany chimed in, pulling out her phone to take a selfie. Captain, handle this. I need a drink. Brandon grabbed Nia's canvas tote bag and tossed it onto the floor of the aisle. You heard the lady. Move now, or I call the police and tell them you're a threat to flight safety. Do you know what happens to people like you when the DHS gets involved? You'll be on a no-fly list for the rest of your life. It was a low blow, a direct threat to her freedom based on a lie. Nia stood up slowly. She was tall, taller than she looked sitting down. She smoothed her hoodie. For a second, Brandon thought he saw a flash of something dangerous in her eyes. Not fear, but a cold, calculating fury. "Fine," Nia said quietly. "I'll move." Brandon smirked, feeling the rush of victory. "Smart choice." Nia picked up her bag. She didn't look at Tiffany, who was already claiming the seat and spraying sanitizer on the armrests. Nia walked to the back, past the luxury divans, past the mahogany dining table, and sat on the small hard jump seat near the galley. Sarah, the flight attendant, looked at Nia with sympathy. Can I get you a water?" she whispered. "No, thank you, Sarah," Nia said, her voice calm. "Just buckle in. It's going to be an interesting flight." As the Gulfstream taxied toward the runway, the atmosphere in the cabin was split into two worlds. In the main cabin, Tiffany St. Clair was laughing loudly, drinking vintage Dom Perignon and complaining to her assistant about the humidity. In the galley, Nia sat on the rigid jump seat, her knees practically touching the bulkhead. The roar of the engines was louder here. Brandon's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are number 1 for departure. Next stop, London Luton. Flight time is 6 hours and 12 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." Nia pulled a phone from her pocket. It wasn't the cracked Android one might expect, given her clothes. It was a prototype, a sleek, unreleased device with no logo on the back. She typed a single message. "Authorize code Black01. Initiate immediate audit of asset N909SA personnel file Pierce, Brandon." She hit send. The plane roared down the runway. The G700's massive Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines thrusting them into the sky. The force pinned Nia against the hard wall, but she didn't flinch. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Brandon came out of the cockpit looking satisfied. He walked into the main cabin to schmooze with Tiffany. This was part of the job, making the client feel special. "Everything to your liking used to be," Brandon said, pouring himself a coffee. "Old man Harding, but he sold the company 3 days ago. Private sale. No one knows who the new buyer is yet. Probably some faceless hedge fund. Well, whoever it is," Tiffany said, "they need to hire better security. That woman back there is a disaster." Brandon nodded. "Don't worry. Once we land in London, I'm having her blacklisted. She won't be flying Stratosphere again." Suddenly, the intercom dinged. It wasn't the flight attendant call button. It was the satellite phone link from the ground. A priority line reserved for operations and ownership. Evan poked his head out of the cockpit, looking pale. "Captain, you have a call. Priority 1. Brandon frowned. Priority 1 calls were rare. They usually meant a mechanical failure or a diversion. "Who is it?" "It's Ops," Evan said, his voice trembling. "And the CEO?" Brandon froze. "The CEO of Stratosphere?" "Yes, sir. And I want to speak to the passenger." Brandon blinked. "Miss St. Clair?" "No, sir," Evan whispered. "The other one." Brandon felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his back. He looked at the closed curtain. He looked at Tiffany, who was busy taking pictures of her caviar. "That's impossible," Brandon muttered. He marched to the cockpit and grabbed the handset. "This is Captain Pierce." "Captain Pierce?" A voice boomed on the other end. It was Marcus Trent, the director of operations for Stratosphere Aviation. "We have a situation. We are tracking a distress signal from the owner's biometric device." "Distress signal?" Brandon asked, confused. "Everything is green across the board." "The plane is fine." "Not the plane," Brandon, Trent barked. "The owner. The new owner of Stratosphere Aviation is on board your flight." Her biometric watch indicated a rapid spike in heart rate, followed by a sustained period of stress. She also sent a code black command. Brandon's stomach dropped. "New owner? Who is the new owner?" "You didn't read the memo this morning," Trent barked. "The company was acquired by Nia Baxter, the founder of Baxter Aerospace. She's on the manifest." Brandon stopped breathing. The name echoed in his skull. Nia, the woman in the hoodie, the woman he had called a cleaner, the woman he had thrown into the jump seat, the woman he had threatened to put on a no-fly list. She wasn't a stowaway. She was the billionaire who had just bought the company he worked for. She literally owned the seat he was sitting in, the wings holding them up, and the very uniform on his back. "Captain," Trent asked, "is Miss Baxter secure?" She is our highest priority asset. Brandon looked through the open cockpit door. The curtain to the galley rippled. A hand reached out and pulled it back. Nia was standing there. She had taken off the hoodie, revealing a simple but clearly expensive black silk blouse underneath. She was holding the prototype phone to her ear. She locked eyes with Brandon. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just raised her eyebrows, waiting. Brandon lowered the handset, his hand shaking. "Evan," Brandon whispered, his voice hoarse. "Take the controls." "Where are you going?" Evan asked. "I have to go apologize," Brandon said, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "Before she fires us at 45,000 feet. Captain Brandon Pierce stood in the galley, the hum of the aircraft vibrating through the soles of his polished shoes. He felt like the cabin pressure had just dropped, sucking the air right out of his lungs. He looked at Nia Baxter, the woman he had relegated to a jump seat, the woman he had threatened with federal agents. She was still sitting there, her posture perfect despite the uncomfortable rigid seat designed for short-term crew use. She held her phone with a casual elegance, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Miss Baxter," Brandon's voice cracked. It was a sound he hadn't made since he was a cadet facing a drill sergeant 40 years ago. Nia didn't look up immediately. She tapped a few more times on her screen, then slowly, agonizingly, raised her eyes. The warmth was gone. Her gaze was clinical, dissecting him like a frog in a biology lab. "Captain Pierce," she said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of the anger he expected, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "You seem distressingly pale. Is the altitude affecting you?" I just received a call from operations," Brandon stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "They informed me of the changes in management." "Changes in ownership," Nia corrected gently. "Management is what I'm reviewing right now." Brandon swallowed hard. He took a step forward, his hands clasped in front of him in a pleading gesture. "Ms. Baxter, please understand. We have strict protocols regarding security and manifest discrepancies. When I saw an unauthorized individual—" "Unauthorized?" Nia interrupted. "My name was on the digital manifest. You didn't check it. You saw a hoodie. You saw my skin color. And you made a decision." No, it wasn't that." Brandon lied, desperate to salvage his career. "It was the presentation. Stratosphere Aviation prides itself on an elite image. I was merely trying to protect the brand." Nia finally stood up. In the small galley, she seemed to loom over him. "You are the brand, Captain. That's the problem. You think the brand is the champagne and the leather seats. You think the brand is keeping people like me out?" She stepped closer, forcing him to retreat slightly. "I bought Stratosphere Aviation because I saw a gap in the market. But looking at you, I see why the previous owner sold. The rot is in the cockpit." Before Brandon could stammer another excuse, the curtain was ripped open again. Tiffany St. Clair stood there, holding an empty crystal flute. She looked annoyed, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a scowl. "Excuse me," Tiffany snapped. "Why is the door open and why is the captain chatting with the help? My glass has been empty for 3 minutes. This service is I don't have a moment," Tiffany huffed. She looked at Nia with pure disdain. "And you? Why are you standing? You're blocking the airflow. Sit back down in your little timeout chair." Nia turned her gaze to Tiffany. It was a look of amusement now, the way a lion might look at a yapping chihuahua. "I'm done sitting," Nia said. "Excuse me?" Tiffany laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You don't get to decide when you're done. You're a charity case. I bet you're using airline miles just to be on this flight. God, did you win a radio contest?" Nia picked up her canvas tote bag. "Captain Pierce," she said, not looking away from Tiffany. "Who paid for this charter?" Brandon froze. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, between the bratty client who paid the bills and the owner who signed the checks. "Miss St. Clair's father," Brandon whispered. "St. Clair Media." "Right," Nia said. "And does St. Clair Media own this plane?" "No," Brandon said softly. "Who owns this plane, Captain?" Nia asked, her voice sharpening. "You do, Miss Baxter," Brandon admitted, his head hanging low. Tiffany blinked. She looked from Brandon to Nia, her brain struggling to process the information. "What did you say?" She what?" Nia didn't wait for him to repeat it. She stepped past Brandon, entering the main cabin. She walked with a natural grace, the confidence of someone who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers while men like Brandon were still waking up. She walked straight to the club seat, the one Tiffany had kicked her out of. Tiffany's designer coat was draped over it. Her handbag was on the floor. Nia picked up the coat with 2 fingers as if it were soiled and dropped it onto the opposing seat. "Hey!" Tiffany shrieked, rushing after her. "Don't touch my things. That is a Burberry trench. It costs more than your life." Nia sat down. She settled into the cream leather, crossed her legs, and looked up at Tiffany. "Actually," Nia said calmly, "I think you'll find that coat costs about $3,000. The fuel load for this flight alone costs $15,000. The landing fees at Luton are another $2. And this aircraft? $75 million. Nia leaned back, resting her arms on the rests. "So, Tiffany, unless you have $75 million in that handbag, I suggest you lower your voice. You're a guest in my house." The silence that followed Nia's declaration, "I own this house," was not the absence of sound, but the total failure of communication. It was the moment the universe tilted on its axis for Tiffany St. Clair. The low, steady hum of the Gulfstream's advanced air filtration system was the only reminder that they were soaring through the ionosphere at 45,000 feet, far above the rigid social hierarchy Tiffany had always taken for granted. Tiffany stood frozen in the aisle, clutching her empty crystal flute, which now felt less like a vessel of luxury and more like a shard of brittle glass. Her mind, usually occupied with the trivialities of designer labels and gossip, short-circuited. She had been taught her entire life that wealth was visible, loud, and white, like her father's media empire or the opulent gold-plated fixtures of this jet. This woman, Nia Baxter, in her worn gray hoodie and scuffed sneakers, represented a category of wealth Tiffany didn't even know existed. Strategic wealth, quiet, purposeful, and lethal. "You're lying," Tiffany whispered, her voice barely a breath. It was a desperate plea to return to the reality where she was the undisputed VIP. "You're lying. You look like a nobody." Nia simply met her gaze, an expression of detached patience on her face. "Google me." It was the most devastating command Nia could have issued. Tiffany fumbled for her customized phone, the device suddenly heavy and unfamiliar in her hand. Her long acrylic nails clicked frantically against the screen as she typed, "Nia Baxter. Baxter Aerospace." The plane's high-speed satellite Wi-Fi delivered the truth instantly. Tiffany's eyes darted across the text, the cold, hard facts of the global economy appearing like a judge's ruling. Nia Baxter, tech mogul and aerospace engineer. Baxter Aerospace acquires Stratosphere Aviation in hostile takeover. Net worth, $4.2 billion. There, emblazoned across the top of the screen, was a high-resolution image of Nia. She was dressed in a sharp-structured ivory suit addressing a crowd at a conference. Her hair was sleek, her posture commanding, and her eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, were exactly the same as the ones currently watching Tiffany's collapse. The only difference was the clothing. Nia's current outfit was a deliberate shield, a test she had placed before the world. And Tiffany, along with Captain Pierce, had failed spectacularly. The realization hit Tiffany like a physical blow. She wasn't just slightly richer than Nia. She wasn't even in the same conversation. Nia Baxter operated on a scale that made Tiffany's inheritance look like pocket change. Tiffany's phone slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the thick, pristine carpet. "Oh my God," she breathed, the sound choked and horrified. "Pick it up," Nia commanded. The 2 words were soft, yet they carried more force than Brandon's earlier shouting. Tiffany, reduced to an automaton by shock, bent down clumsily and retrieved her phone. She looked at the captain, her mind searching for any conspirator, any ally in the old regime. You knew this was the owner. And you let me talk to her like that? You let me humiliate her?" Brandon, who had been hovering near the galley entrance, looked like a man who had already been drawn and quartered. "I didn't know," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Miss Sinclair, I swear, I only found out moments ago when Trent called." "Be quiet, Brandon," Nia said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. It was simply a statement of fact, an absolute cessation of his ability to speak. Brandon's mouth snapped shut. He looked as if he might crumble to dust under the pressure of Nia's absolute control. Nia turned to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was witnessing the entire power exchange with a mix of terror and fascinated awe. Sarah quickly averted her eyes, pretending to polish a perfectly clean glass. "Sarah," Nia called out. "Yes, Miss Baxter." Sarah hurried forward, suddenly finding herself in the presence of someone she genuinely respected. "I'm hungry," Nia said, leaning back into the luxurious seat. "What's on the menu?" "We have the lobster thermidor that was prepared for Miss Sinclair and a Wagyu beef slider selection," Sarah recited professionally. "I'll take the lobster," Nia said, "and a glass of that vintage Dom Perignon." The one Miss Sinclair said tasted like poverty. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched Sarah's lips. "Right away, ma'am." "With pleasure." Sarah bustled back to the galley, her movement containing a distinct triumphant energy. Tiffany remained standing awkwardly in the aisle. Her seat, the coveted high-status seat, was taken. The other leather divans, once symbols of luxury, now felt like seats of profound demotion. "Sit down, Tiffany," Nia said, gesturing to the seat across the aisle. "We have 6 hours left in the air. We might as well chat." Tiffany sank onto the opposing seat, pulling her designer coat around her like an inadequate shield. She looked physically diminished, her glamour evaporating under the scrutiny of true power. Are you going to kick me off at 45,000 feet?" Nia raised an eyebrow, a hint of genuine surprise in her voice. "I'm not a monster. Besides, I have pressing business with your father. It would be rude to eject his daughter mid-flight. But do understand this. You are no longer the client. You are baggage." Tiffany swallowed hard, her composure utterly shattered. "My father does business with you? He buys satellite time from my company," Nia explained, resting her hands calmly on the armrests. "Baxter Aerospace controls the orbital grid his entire media empire runs on. If I snap my fingers right now, St. Clair Media goes dark in 3 continents. His news, his stocks, his communication, all gone. So yes, we do business." The full weight of her recklessness finally crushed Tiffany. She hadn't just insulted a rich woman. She had jeopardized her family's legacy. Nia shifted her attention, focusing her cold, surgical gaze on the man who had been the chief architect of her humiliation. "Captain Pierce." Brandon snapped to attention, his muscles screaming under the instantaneous command. "Yes, ma'am." "The jump seat," Nia said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "It looked very uncomfortable. You informed me it was for safety purposes and only for short duration." It is, ma'am. It's stiff. It's not meant for a passenger." "I see," Nia said, a profound stillness settling over her face. "Since I am now the owner and primarily responsible for the safety of our passengers, I think I need to test the crew's endurance under duress. It's important for safety standards to understand how the jump seat impacts fatigue." Brandon's eyes widened, understanding the impending cruelty, the poetic, deliberate cruelty of the command. "Evan is a perfectly capable pilot, isn't he?" Nia asked. "He's certified on the G700? "Yes, he has his type rating," Brandon said, the words barely audible. "Good. Evan can fly the plane for the next few hours," Nia said, the finality of her tone sealing Brandon's fate. "I want you to sit in the jump seat. Captain, I want you to sit there, face the wall, and think about the manifest. I want you to sit there and remember exactly what laziness looks like at 45,000 feet." She paused, letting the severity of the punishment sink in. "And if you move, or if you complain, or if you try to come out before I tell you, you won't just be fired when we land. I'll ensure that every regulatory body knows why you were removed from command mid-flight. You will never fly anything bigger than a kite again, Brandon. Your career will be terminated, permanently grounded before we touch down in Luton." The captain who had ruled this aircraft like a petty tyrant looked at the luxury cabin, the warm, cocooning lighting, the sight of Sarah returning with a chilled bottle of vintage champagne. He looked at Tiffany, who wouldn't meet his eyes, terrified of being associated with his fall. He was a relic. His power was an illusion. His judgment was flawed. "Go," Nia said. Brandon Pierce turned slowly. He walked past Tiffany, past the glowing mahogany table, past the silent judgment of the jet's opulent interior. He walked in the cramped, cold galley, lowered the small, hard jump seat, and sat down. His knees hit the metal bulkhead. The rush of air conditioning and the deafening engine noise isolated him completely. He stared at the stainless steel coffee maker, his own distorted reflection staring back at a broken man in an expensive uniform. Back in the main cabin, Nia took the glass of Dom Perignon from Sarah's tray. She raised it to the light, admiring the slow stream of fine bubbles. "Perfectly adequate," Nia murmured. She then took a slow, deliberate sip. She looked at Tiffany, who was staring at her with naked fear. "So, Tiffany," Nia said, her voice suddenly shifting back to a pleasant conversational tone. "Tell me about this aesthetic you were so worried about ruining. Did you know the materials for this jump seat are specifically designed for maximum rigidity to withstand G-forces, making them exceptionally uncomfortable during long periods?" Tiffany nervously ran her hand over her hair. I love hoodies," she whispered, a desperate, pathetic attempt at solidarity. "Honestly, I wear them all the time." Nia smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. "I'm sure you do." She pulled out her prototype phone, the device that connected her to a multi-billion-dollar empire, and sent the first of many commands to the ground. The final act of karma was only moments away, but for now, the flight had become her personal classroom, and the lessons had just begun. The final moments of the flight were a study in silent, grinding tension. As the Gulfstream G700 began its controlled, stately descent toward London Luton Airport, the cabin became eerily quiet. For 6 agonizing hours, Captain Brandon Pierce had been confined to the galley jump seat. His legs were numb, his back was screaming with pain, and the polished veneer of his professional composure had crumbled entirely. He was a man who had always viewed himself as being above the fray, untouchable in his lofty command, and now he was physically pinned against the wall of the service area, forced to confront the magnitude of his professional error. The sounds of the main cabin, the low murmur of Nia Baxter's voice, the faint clink of crystal against crystal as Sarah meticulously cleared the luxurious dinner setting, were a constant, torturous reminder of the world of comfort and authority he had forfeited. He had listened to Nia methodically dissect market trends with a chilling clarity that proved she was exactly who she claimed to be, a global force. His initial dismissal of her as a stowaway now felt like an insane delusion. When the landing gear lowered with a heavy metallic thud, Brandon flinched, the sound echoing through the fuselage like a jail cell door slamming shut. It was the sound of finality. Evan, the co-pilot, brought the multi-million-dollar jet down onto the damp British runway with a precision Brandon himself couldn't fault. The aircraft rolled to a stop with a gentle sigh of reverse thrust and then taxied slowly toward the designated private hangar area. The fastened seatbelt sign extinguished with a soft ping. Brandon did not move immediately. His muscles were locked, but more crucially, he was paralyzed by dread. He felt the cold certainty of his fate settling over him. Nia Baxter was the first to move. She rose from the plush club seat, the very seat Brandon had ordered her out of, and gathered her canvas tote. There was no hurried movement, no residual anger in her posture. She moved with the calm, devastating purpose of a CEO whose time is valuable. She walked toward the cockpit door. "Evan," she said, leaning into the flight deck, her voice amplified slightly by the acoustics, reached Brandon. "Excellent landing. You have a gentle touch both with the stick and with the people. That's a rare quality." Evan's voice was filled with startled pleasure. "Thank you, Miss Baxter. I appreciate that. Remind me to review your seniority status next week," Nia continued. The statement was a seismic tremor in the stratosphere aviation hierarchy. I think you're ready for the left seat. The co-pilot's promotion was swift, decisive, and the first piece of Brandon's empire being handed over. It was a clear message. Competence and kindness were being rewarded while arrogance was being punished. Nia then turned her gaze to Brandon, who was struggling to uncurl his aching limbs. He managed to stand, his suit jacket wrinkled, the once immaculate crease in his trousers gone. He felt old, exposed, and vulnerable. He frantically smoothed the lapels of his uniform and placed his captain's cap on his head, a desperate last-ditch effort to reclaim some fragment of authority. "Ms. Baxter," Brandon began, his voice dry and strained, attempting to infuse his words with the professional deference he had so carelessly discarded earlier. "I hope the flight was acceptable despite the start. I would like to formally apologize again for the gross misunderstanding." Nia's eyes held him steady, an unwavering, relentless focus. "Open the door, Mr. Pierce." It was an order, not a request. Brandon swallowed the lump in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. He walked the few paces to the main cabin door, his movements stiff and unnatural. He disarmed the emergency slide, rotated the heavy handle, and pushed the door outward. The automated staircase deployed with a hydraulic hiss, connecting the luxurious capsule of the G700 to the cold, wet world outside. A rush of cool, damp London air filled the cabin, carrying with it the metallic smell of jet fuel. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs, visible through the open door, was a sight that confirmed Brandon's worst fears. It wasn't just the usual anonymous ground crew. There were 3 identical black SUVs, their headlights cutting through the gloom, and standing in the center was a man in a flawless gray suit holding a slender briefcase. This was Marcus Trent, the Stratosphere Aviation Director of Operations, who had obviously flown ahead to meet his new boss and execute her will. Nia walked down the stairs first. She didn't hold the rail. She descended with the total authority of ownership, her focus fixed not on the ground, but on the man waiting for her. Brandon followed, his legs feeling like lead, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Tiffany trailed after him, looking pale. "The plane is magnificent, Marcus," Nia said, her voice clear and carrying on the damp air, echoing off the nearby hangars. "The avionics are state-of-the-art. The interior is pristine." She paused, allowing the praise for the aircraft to settle. Then she turned slowly, deliberately to face Brandon, who had just reached the bottom of the stairs. "The personnel, however," Nia finished, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, "is defective." Brandon froze. The ground crew, who had begun approaching the aircraft, stopped their work. The sound of an engine powering down in the distance seemed unnaturally loud. "Captain Pierce," Nia began, the formality of the title now sounding like a deliberate, cruel irony. "Do you know why I'm firing you?" Brandon's face went scarlet, a deep flush of shame and impotent rage. "Ms. Baxter, surely a reprimand is sufficient after 20 years of service. I'm not firing you because you were rude to me," Nia interrupted, cutting his plea short. She took a single significant step toward him. "I'm firing you because you failed the most basic test of your profession, situational awareness. You saw a hoodie and assumed threat or nuisance. You didn't check the manifest. You didn't check the ID. You let your bias blind you to the reality of who was on your aircraft." She pointed a finger directly at the gold wings pinned over his heart. The badge which symbolized meticulousness and trust now seemed to mock him. "If you can't be bothered to read a passenger manifest because you're too busy judging a woman's shoes," Nia demanded, her voice rising with cold intensity, "how can I trust you to read a weather radar when you have 300 lives on board? How can I trust you to cross-reference an instrument panel in an emergency? You are lazy, Captain. And in aviation, laziness kills." The weight of the accusation was crushing. It wasn't about disrespecting the owner. It was about failing the principles of his own life's work. His initial error, his prejudice had spiraled into a catastrophic failure of judgment, and she had exposed it in front of a dozen witnesses. "Marcus," Nia commanded, her attention snapping to the director of operations. Collect his badge and his company credentials. He is not to re-enter the aircraft. He has been relieved of all duties effective immediately. Arrange for him to take a commercial flight back to New Jersey, economy class. Marcus Trent, looking deeply uncomfortable but professionally ruthless, stepped forward. Badge Brandon. Now, with hands that felt alien and clumsy, Brandon unclipped his ID from his blazer and slowly handed it over. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the tail of the plane, N909SA, his jet, his sky, now undeniably hers. He looked up at the cockpit, where Evan was now sitting in the captain's seat, staring straight ahead. Brandon Pierce, a man whose life was defined by control and command, was utterly and irrevocably powerless. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked toward the terminal building. The sound of the wind was the only thing filling the void where his pride had once been. His uniform was meaningless, his 20 years of service reduced to a cautionary tale. He walked away from the jet, away from his life, his slow, defeated pace a testament to the hard, unyielding hammer of karma. Nia stood on the damp tarmac, the chill of the London fog biting through her thin silk blouse, though she hardly felt it. The adrenaline of the confrontation still hummed in her veins. She watched Brandon Pierce walk away, his figure retreating into the gray mist. He moved with a heavy shuffling gait, stripped of the swagger that had filled the cockpit only hours before. He was no longer the master of the sky. He was just a man in a uniform he no longer had the right to wear, carrying the weight of a career destroyed by his own arrogance. Silence descended on the airfield, broken only by the distant roar of a commercial airliner taking off, a world Brandon would now have to reacquaint himself with from the wrong side of the cockpit door. Nia turned slowly, her heels clicking rhythmically on the wet pavement. She shifted her gaze to the fleet of waiting vehicles. Tiffany St. Clair was attempting to make herself invisible. The media heiress, usually desperate for the spotlight, was currently cowering behind the rear bumper of the second black SUV. She looked small, clutching her designer handbag to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting between Nia and the terminal building as if looking for an escape route. "Tiffany," Nia called out. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the private terminal, it carried the weight of a judicial sentence. Tiffany jumped, her heels skidding slightly on the asphalt. Yes, Miss Baxter," she stammered, stepping out from her hiding spot. She looked terrified, stripped of her earlier bravado. "Your car is here," Nia said, gesturing calmly to the vehicle. "The driver has instructions to take you to your hotel. But before you go, you should probably answer your phone." Tiffany froze. A low, persistent buzzing sound was emanating from her pocket. It had been vibrating for nearly 2 minutes. A relentless, angry demand for attention. With trembling fingers, Tiffany pulled the device from her trench coat. The screen lit up the gloom with a single word: "Daddy." She stared at it, the color draining from her face until she looked as gray as the London sky. She looked up at Nia, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. What did you do?" Nia adjusted the strap of her canvas tote bag, the same bag Tiffany had mocked as poverty-stricken hours ago. "I used the in-flight Wi-Fi to send your father an email while we were somewhere over the Atlantic," Nia explained, her tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "I informed him that due to the personal conduct of his representative, you felt that our business relationship lacked the necessary foundation of mutual respect." Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I suggested that we renegotiate his satellite leasing contracts immediately," Nia continued, stepping closer. "Because of the inconvenience caused by his daughter, I bumped the leasing price up by 12%. 12%? Tiffany shrieked, the number cutting through her shock. That's millions of dollars. "He'll kill me." "He's certainly not happy," Nia agreed coolly. "I also mentioned that you attempted to commandeer the owner's seat and treated the crew with disdain. I believe he intends to have a very long discussion with you about the value of humility. And knowing your father, I suspect your clothing allowance is about to be significantly revised." Tiffany stared at the phone as if it were a live grenade. The buzzing stopped, then immediately started again. She looked at Nia, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. She had judged a woman by her cover, and it had cost her father an empire's ransom. The reality of her entitlement crashed down on her. I'm sorry, Tiffany whispered, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first genuine, unscripted thing she had said all day. I didn't know. Don't apologize to me, Nia said firmly. She didn't offer comfort. She offered a lesson. Apologize to the next person you think is beneath you. Apologize to the waiter, the cleaner, the driver.